She was standing at her father's grave when her husband walked in with another woman on his arm. Not hiding, not ashamed. His pregnant mistress, in front of everyone who had known her father. Her father had been in the ground for less than 10 minutes, and the man she had been married to for 4 years walked straight up to her and handed her divorce papers. At the graveside, while people were still paying their last respects. The crowd went silent. She didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't say a word. She just looked at him, the way a woman looks when something inside her has quietly, permanently closed. Then she signed, turned back to her father's grave, and said nothing. Behind her he smiled, because he thought he had won. He had no idea. No idea what the quiet woman he had just humiliated had already set in motion. No idea that her silence was the beginning of the end for him. Hello, friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video, share, and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Is it United States, London, maybe Canada, Jamaica, South Africa, or anywhere? We want to know. And tell us what you learned at the end of this video. Claire Sinclair was standing at her father's grave in the hot sun, holding a small photograph, tears burning down her cheeks. She was only 32 years old, but looked older. She looked every bit of what the last 5 years had cost her. Grief, stress, sleepless nights, and a marriage that had been bleeding her dry for years. Claire was 5 years old when Victoria, her mother, died from a heart attack. Edmund Sinclair held his daughter's hand at her mother's grave that day and made her a promise that he would take care of her, that she would never lack anything that mattered, and he never broke that promise, not once. He raised Claire alone. He learned to braid her hair. He packed her lunch every morning with a small folded note tucked under the sandwich before leaving for work. Edmund worked in a government office for 31 years. Same desk, same car, same 3 suits on rotation without complaint. Because everything he did was for her. He was the happiest man alive when Claire graduated the top of her class and earned a full scholarship to university. Claire built a career in finance, sharp, focused, and impossible to ignore. For over 20 years, it was just the two of them, building, surviving, planning. The only time Edmund tried to remarry was 2 years after his wife's death. He had stopped because the woman suggested sending Claire to a motherless baby's home. He never tried again. He simply decided that Claire would never feel like second place in her own home, and he kept that promise every single day. 5 years ago, Claire met Marcus at a friend's birthday party. Marcus was charming and attentive, and he listened to her in a way that felt like being seen. When she brought him home, he shook Edmund's hand warmly. He said all the right things, compliments Edmund. Praised the food, talked about his work, his family, his plans for the future, asked questions, and listened carefully. Edmund felt something cold at the back of his mind. Marcus went on and on, talking about himself, his family, and his plans for the future. Edmund watched as he analyzed everything, without including anything he would do for his daughter. He talked as if he had everything figured out and only needed someone perfect to fit into his life. He watched him the entire afternoon and said almost nothing. That evening after Marcus left, Claire sat across from her father, glowing, smiling in a way Edmund had never seen her before. "Do you love him that much?" he asked. "Yes," she said, smiling. "I want to marry him." Edmund turned his cup slowly. "He's very smooth, Dad. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying I see it." He looked up. "That man spent 3 hours here today and never once said anything he didn't think about first." "That's called being respectful." "Sometimes," Edmund replied, "it's something else." Claire laughed it off, said he was overthinking. Edmund didn't argue. He just looked at her, in that calm, patient way of his. She married Marcus a year later. Before she walked down the aisle, Edmund held both her hands and said 4 words. "You can always come home. She smiled and kissed his cheek and thought he was being sentimental. The first year of their wedding was the best of Claire's life. Marcus was a business executive, confident and driven, and in those early months he was still the man she had fallen in love with. They built a home together. They had dinner together every evening. They talked about the future. Children, travel, growing old in the same house. Claire was happy in a way she hadn't known she could be. She called Edmund every Sunday, and he would listen and ask small questions and say very little, but she could hear the smile in his voice. 1 year passed in a blur, then the second year. Everything went well until the day they were celebrating their second anniversary, and Vivian arrived to celebrate it. Marcus's mother was a well-dressed woman who carried herself like someone permanently waiting to find fault. She arrived that weekend with a warm smile, and within 20 minutes of sitting down, she looked across the table at Claire and said it. "So when are you two giving me grandchildren?" Claire smiled politely. "We're still settling in. We have time." Vivian's smile didn't move. "Time," she repeated quietly. "Yes, for now." "You've been married for 2 years and you're still settling in. Are you going to wait until you can't have children again?" Marcus said nothing. Claire told herself it was a normal question. Every mother asked it. It meant nothing. But Vivian asked again the next visit, and the one after that. Each time the warmth in her voice reduced slightly. Each time the pause that followed lasted a little longer, until one visit she stopped directing the question at Claire altogether and turned to her son instead. "Marcus, when is your wife giving you children? A home without children is an empty home." She said it directly in front of Claire, like she wasn't sitting right there, and Marcus said nothing. That silence was the first crack, because after every visit Marcus looked at Claire a little differently, more distant, more impatient, like his mother had handed him a complaint he was now carrying around and building on quietly. Then one evening after Vivian left, he finally said what had been growing behind his eyes for months. "What is the problem with you, Claire? Why can't you give me a child?" Claire took a breath. "Marcus, maybe we should both go for a checkup, just to understand what's happening." The room went still. Marcus looked at her the way a man looks when he has just been handed an insult wrapped in a suggestion. He stood up slowly. "A checkup?" he said quietly. "I'm not saying anything is wrong. I just think it makes sense to—" "I am perfectly fine, Claire. I have never had complaints before you." The sentence landed exactly the way he intended it to. Clean on the surface. Devastating underneath. Claire opened her mouth and closed it again. "Maybe," he said, adjusting his jacket. "The problem is that you've focused too much on your career for many years. Because of that, your body might not be ready to have a child. Some women can't have children. Maybe you are one of them." He said it the way he delivered business observations. Calm, measured, final. Then he picked up his phone and left the room. Claire sat at that table for a long time after he left. She didn't cry. Not immediately. She turned his words over slowly, looking for the place where she could argue back, looking for the gap where he was wrong. She couldn't find it, not because he was right, but because he had said it so calmly that it had entered her like a fact rather than an insult. Claire went to the doctor alone the following week. She sat in the consultation room, answered every question steadily. The doctor ran a full panel of tests, thorough and complete. When the results came back, she collected them in a brown envelope, brought them home and placed them on the table in front of Marcus without saying a word. He looked at the envelope, then at her. "Results can always be wrong," he said. "And even if they're right, the body changes. What's fine today isn't always fine tomorrow." He slid the envelope back toward her and returned to his phone. She picked it up, put it in her bag, and never raised the subject again. But the subject didn't disappear. It simply moved to Vivian's phone calls, which landed in the house every other day, like small, controlled explosions. Claire could hear Marcus's voice change within minutes of his mother calling. Something in him tightened, realigned, and by the time he hung up, he was someone slightly different from the man who had answered. Then the complaints changed. It was no longer only about children. Now it was everything. The food wasn't seasoned right. The house wasn't maintained to the standard a home should be. She was always exhausted because of work, and her exhaustion was the reason her body couldn't function properly. She needed to reconsider her priorities. A woman who invested as much as Claire did in her career was clearly not serious about building a family. "My mother ran a home and raised me without making it anyone else's problem," he said one evening. "Your mother didn't work," Claire said quietly. "My mother made choices," he replied. "The right ones." Claire said nothing. She cleared the table, washed the dishes, and went to bed. One afternoon, Claire drove to her father's house. She didn't plan to say much. She just needed to sit somewhere that felt safe. Edmund made tea without being asked, and they sat at the same kitchen table they had always sat at, and for a long time neither of them said anything. "You're not happy," Edmund said finally. It wasn't a question. Claire looked down at her cup. "It's nothing deep. Marcus and I are just going through an adjustment." Edmund was quiet for a moment. Then he said it the same way he had said it at the wedding. Gently, without drama. "You can always come home, Claire. Whenever you are ready, the door doesn't close." She nodded, squeezed his hand, and told him she was fine. 12 months passed like that. 12 months of Vivian's phone calls landing like weather changes in the house. 12 months of complaints that shifted shape but never disappeared. 12 months of Marcus growing quieter in the ways that mattered and louder in the ways that hurt. Then he started disappearing. Not dramatically, gradually. Evenings that ended late without explanation. A phone that was always in his pocket or face down on the table. Weekends where he was physically present but entirely somewhere else. Claire noticed everything. She filed it away in the quiet, careful part of herself that had been paying attention long before her mind was ready to admit what it was seeing. Then one Saturday afternoon, Marcus walked into the sitting room with a woman Claire had never seen. He didn't ask Claire to sit down. He didn't seek her face for a reaction. He simply stood in the center of the room and made his introduction like he was announcing a business decision that had already been finalized. "This is Maya. She's my girlfriend." Claire stood completely still. "I'm not asking for your opinion," Marcus said. "I'm telling you." After that, he stopped pretending. He stopped eating her food, stopped asking about her day, stopped occupying the same spaces she occupied. He moved through the house like she was a piece of furniture he had grown tired of, but hadn't yet bothered to move. He spoke to her only when he needed something. He made decisions without consulting her. He came and went without explanation. Claire went to work every morning, came home every evening, did what needed to be done, and said very little. Then one evening, Marcus came home and stood in the doorway of the sitting room and said it without sitting down. "Maya is pregnant." Claire looked at him. "I just thought you should know," he said, and walked away. She sat there for a long time after he left the room. The television was on. Some program she wasn't watching. The house was the same house it had always been, and yet it felt like something in it had permanently changed its shape. The doctor had assured her there was nothing wrong with her. Nothing wrong. She turned that phrase over in her mind, the way you turn something over when you are trying to understand how it can be true and feel so wrong at the same time. The woman she used to be. The one who laughed easily, who called her father every Sunday morning, who walked into rooms with something bright and alive about her. That woman had been going quiet for 2 years. Now she went completely silent, not broken, not begging, just silent. The kind of silence that has already made up its mind. One Tuesday morning, Claire got the call while she was at her desk that Edmund collapsed. He suffered a severe brain hemorrhage. By the time Claire got to the hospital, her father was unconscious. The doctors explained that the hemorrhage had caused not significant damage to the left side of his brain. Even if he survived, he might never speak properly, move independently, or recognize the people around him again. Claire called Marcus for 5 times. He didn't answer. Then she sent a message. My father had been admitted, and it's serious. Marcus saw the message. He read it, but didn't respond. By the time Claire returned home that evening, Marcus wasn't there. Claire saw Marcus 3 days after her father was admitted. She told him again. He nodded, then said, "Keep me updated." Marcus did not come that evening. He did not come the next day. He did not ask which hospital, didn't ask about the diagnosis, or what Claire needed, or how she was taking it. He just said, "Keep me updated." He did not come once in the entire time Edmund was in that hospital. Not once. Marcus continued with his life with Maya. Anytime Claire returns home to rest or take something, she always finds the house dirty. Dirty plates left on the dining table, things scattered around the house, laundry unfold. Claire did everything. She washed the dirty plates, cleared the table, folded the laundry. She did everything, even though she knew Marcus had come home with Maya. She did everything without saying a word. Not because of anything, but because she had long since learned exactly what asking him for things cost her. Edmund died exactly 3 weeks after he was admitted. The evening before he died, he opened his eyes clearly. More clearly than he had in days. He looked at Claire for a long moment, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "You can always come home, Claire. The door is always open." She squeezed his hand, smiled so he couldn't see what was happening behind her eyes. By the next morning, Edmund was gone. Claire did not call Marcus that day. Not because she had forgotten, but because she already knew exactly what she would receive. She drove home alone. Marcus was in the sitting room when she walked in. He looked up briefly. "My father died this morning," Claire said. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that." He looked back down at his phone. Claire stood in the middle of her own sitting room and felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not tears, just a vast, quiet stillness, like the last door in a long corridor finally closing. She went to the bedroom, changed her clothes, and began making the calls that needed to be made. She arranged everything alone: the church, the cemetery, the program, the caterers, the flowers, every detail, every phone call, every decision. She did not ask Marcus for help, did not ask him to contribute a single thing. Not because she was making a point, but because she had long since stopped expecting anything from him and had learned that expecting nothing was the only way to keep moving. When the date was confirmed, she told him simply, "The burial is on Saturday." Marcus said, "Okay," without looking up from his laptop. Saturday arrived the way difficult days always arrive. Quietly, without warning in the morning light. Claire was up before dawn. She dressed carefully in black. She took the small frame photograph from her bag. Edmund in a gray suit at her graduation, holding her certificate. She held it against her chest as she left the house. The church service was full. Edmund's colleagues, old neighbors, people from the community who had known him for decades, people whose lives he had touched in the quiet, unremarkable ways that ordinary men touch lives. Every face Claire saw broke something open in her chest. Every handshake, every "your father was a good man," spoken into her ear by people with genuine tears in their eyes. She sat in the front row and held his photograph and breathed through it all. Her eyes were swollen. Then at the graveside, as they began to lower Edmund down, something moved through the crowd. Claire felt it before she saw it, a shift, a stillness, whispers beginning at the back and moving forward like a current. She turned. Marcus was walking in through the cemetery gates. He wore a black suit that cost a fortune. Pressed, perfect. The suit of a man who had dressed carefully for an occasion, but he was not alone. Maya was beside him. She wore a black gown, her makeup perfect, red lipstick sharp against her face. Her arm was looped through his, unhurried, unbothered. Her pregnancy visible and undisguised. her hand resting comfortably in the crook of his elbow, as if they were arriving at a dinner reservation rather than a burial. Marcus walked through that crowd without lowering his eyes once, without dropping his head, without a single gesture of acknowledgement toward where he was or what he was doing. He found a position near the graveside where he could be seen, and he stood there, with Maya pressed against his side, at Edmund Sinclair's open grave, in front of every person who had ever known that man and his daughter. The crowd had gone completely still. Claire turned back to face her father's grave. Her eyes were red, her jaw set. She breathed. She did not look at Marcus again. The pastor finished his prayer. Something about rest and peace, and a life well lived. Then the mourners began forming a quiet line to pay their last respects. One by one they stepped forward, dropping flowers, bowing their heads. Claire stood at the graveside, receiving each one, shaking hands, accepting embraces, holding herself together with everything she had. That was when Marcus moved. He joined the line quietly, calmly, like a husband coming to stand beside his grieving wife. People stepped aside for him because he was her husband, because nobody suspected anything. He walked straight toward Claire with Maya on his arm, and with his free hand reached into the inside pocket of his expensive black suit and pulled out a brown envelope. He held it out to her. His voice was low, deliberate, perfectly controlled. "I need you to sign these, Claire." Claire looked at the envelope, then at his face, trying to understand what she was looking at. "What is this? Divorce papers." His voice was quiet enough to seem civil, loud enough for every person standing nearby to hear every single word. "I've already signed. I thought today was as good a day as any to sort this out." The silence that fell was immediate and total. Someone behind Claire made a sound, a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, then another, then another. The whispers began spreading backward through the crowd like fire moving through dry grass. Phones that had been pointed at the grave were now pointed directly at Marcus and Claire and Maya, whose hand had not moved from his arm. Claire looked at him. "You thought my father's graveside was the best place to serve me divorce papers, Marcus." It wasn't a question. It was something else entirely. Marcus didn't blink. "I think it's best if you bury every concern you have along with your father today." The crowd reacted, audible this time. Several people spoke at once. Someone's phone screen was pointed directly at Marcus's face. "Maya and I are getting married as soon as our baby is born," he continued, his voice smooth, unhurried. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment and was delivering it exactly as planned. "So let's not drag this out. Sign and I'll leave immediately." Maya looked at Claire and smiled. Then she raised her hand where the engagement ring is and waved it. Claire looked at him for a long time. Not at the envelope, at his face, at this man standing at her father's open grave in a pressed black suit announcing a wedding, at Maya beside him, waving her engagement ring at her, at the phones recording everything from every angle, at the crowd that had gone completely silent around them, waiting to see what a grieving woman does when the world has decided to humiliate her at her lowest point. She looked at Marcus the way her father had looked at him that very first Sunday lunch, quietly, completely, without missing a single thing. All she saw was a man whose mind was already made up, a man who had planned to humiliate her and isn't holding back. "Did I ever mean anything to you, Marcus?" She knew she wasn't supposed to ask. She knew the marriage had been over for a long time. She knew asking gave him something, but she wanted to know, not for the marriage, not to change anything, just to know, just to hear whatever truth was left between them, spoken out loud over her father's grave. Marcus's composure cracked slightly, not with guilt, with impatience. "Let's not do this here, Claire." "You chose here," she said quietly. "It's not my fault you couldn't give me a child," he said, his voice lower now but no less sharp. "Maybe our story would have been different, but it wasn't. So sign the papers, and let's both move on." He reached into his breast pocket and took out a pen, held it out to her between two fingers, the way a man holds something he considers a formality, something already decided, something he just needs a signature on before he can close the file and walk away. Claire looked at the pen, then she took it, opened the envelope, turned to the last page where the signature line waited. Her hand was steady. Her face was still. No tears, no trembling, no hesitation. She signed. One clean signature, the same signature she had practiced her whole life, the same one she had used to accept her university scholarship, the same one she had used to build a career, the same one that was about to appear on documents Marcus had no idea would eventually be the least significant paper she would sign that month. She handed the pen and paper back, and she turned back to her father's grave. Behind her, she heard Marcus fold the papers, heard the envelope close, heard him say something quiet to Maya. Then she heard their footsteps, both of them, moving away from the grave. Claire did not turn around. She kept her eyes on her father's grave, on the fresh earth, on the flowers, on the photographs she had placed on the wood. But she felt the exact moment they walked through those gates. She felt it the way you feel a weight you have been carrying for 4 years suddenly lift from your shoulders without warning. Claire stood at her father's grave for a long time after Marcus and Maya disappeared through those gates. Claire drove to her father's house after the burial. She didn't plan to. She just found herself driving in that direction without making a conscious decision, the way you move toward the only place that has ever felt completely safe when everything else has collapsed around you. She parked outside and sat in the car for a long time. The house was quiet in the way that only empty houses are quiet, not peaceful, hollow. Claire stood in the middle of that sitting room and pressed the photograph against her chest and breathed.
She was still standing there when the knock came at the door. She almost didn't answer it. She wasn't ready for anyone. She wasn't ready for condolences or conversation or the careful faces people arrange when they come to sit with grief. But something made her open the door. The man standing outside was in his 60s, gray at his temples, a dark suit that had been worn with the kind of care that suggested respect for the occasion. He carried a leather briefcase, and when Claire opened the door, he looked at her with the quiet, steady eyes of someone who had been expecting this moment for a long time. "My name is Gerald Boateng. I was your father's lawyer for 31 years. He paused. He asked me to come today. Specifically, today. He was very clear about that. Claire stepped back and let him in. He sat across from her at Edmund's kitchen table. Gerald Boateng placed his briefcase on the table and opened it slowly. Claire looked at the files he was placing on the table, then at what was written there. What does this mean? Your father's estate, as of 2 weeks ago, was valued at $700 million. You are the sole heir to everything. Claire looked at the documents again, looked at the numbers and shook her head. There must be a mistake. Claire knew her father invested in some things, but she didn't think it would be as huge as this. He never kept secret from her. Your father came to me when he first began feeling unwell, 8 months ago. He said he wanted to make sure everything was in order before anything happened to him. To make sure you are protected. Protected from what? She asked. Gerald looked at her for a moment. From what Marcus has been doing for the past 2 years. The room went very still. Your father hired a private investigator 2 years ago, Claire. He did not tell you because he knew you would ask him to stop. He knew you were still trying to save your marriage, and he respected that. But he could not stand by and watch without doing something. He paused, then opened the first file. The house you currently live in with your husband was purchased by your father 11 years ago. It has been registered in your name since the day of your wedding, because your father transferred it to you as a wedding gift. That's not possible. It's true that my father introduced the place to us before our wedding. He said it was his family's property and we could stay there. Marcus agreed because the place was closer to our workplace. Gerald smiled. Marcus found out about the ownership of the property from a colleague at work, so he approached a financial institution to refinance the property in his own name after forging your signature. He forged it? Claire said. Yes, he forged your signature, Gerald confirmed. He submitted fraudulent documentation to the bank. Our investigator obtained copies of those documents. He placed them on the table in front of her. This is evidence of fraud, forgery, and attempted illegal property transfer. It is a criminal matter. Claire looked at the papers, at her signature, written in someone else's hand. Slightly wrong in the way that forged signatures are always slightly wrong when you know what the real one looks like. Gerald opened the second file. There is also the matter of text messages recovered during the investigation. He placed printed copies on the table. Between your husband and his mother, and between your husband and the woman he is currently in a relationship with. Claire looked at the messages. Marcus and Vivian. Planning. Coordinating. Discussing how to remove Claire from the house without a fight. How to make it look like she had chosen to leave. How to manage the timeline around Maya's pregnancy. How to make sure Claire had no legal foothold before she understood what was happening. Make sure she doesn't go to a lawyer before we sort the house. She won't. She's too proud to ask for help. Good. Keep it that way. Claire read every word. She read them the way you read something you already knew, but needed to see written down before you could fully believe you had lived it. Your father read all of these, Gerald said quietly. Every message, every document, every finding the investigator brought back. He said to make sure she has everything she needs to finish this properly. Claire pressed her hand flat on the table, tears welling in her eyes. He never trusted Marcus. I thought he was sentimental. I didn't know he was protecting me. Your father was one of the most careful, meticulous men I've ever known, Claire, and he did it all for you. He took out a brown envelope. Your father said I should give you this. Claire's hand shook as she collected the file and clutched it on her chest. Gerald stayed for another hour, walking her through the properties, the investments Edmund had made quietly over 31 years. Land purchased early when prices were low. A small commercial property that had tripled in value. Company shares registered in Claire's name. Savings accounts she had never known existed. And most importantly, what to do next. Claire sat alone at Edmund's kitchen table for a long time after Gerald left, the letter sitting in front of her. After a while, she gathered enough courage. She opened the letter. The paper was lined. The handwriting was Edmund's, careful, deliberate, slightly slanted to the right the way it had always been. Claire, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. There are things I need to tell you that I couldn't say while I was alive. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that if I told you what I had found, you would ask me to stop. You would tell me you could handle it yourself. You would tell me you were fine. You were never fine. I knew that. I watched it happen, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. Watching my daughter disappear inside a marriage and not being able to pull her out. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I prepared. From the day that man sat at my table and talked for 3 hours about himself, without once asking what kind of woman my daughter was, I knew. I couldn't prove it. I had nothing to point to, but I knew. And I started preparing. Everything Gerald has told you is true. The house is yours. It has always been yours. The properties, the investments, all of it is yours. I built it for you, not for a marriage, for you. Marcus tried to take the house. He forged your signature. He thought you had nothing and no one, and he thought that by the time you understood what was happening, it would be too late. He didn't know that the quiet old man he looked down at every time he sat at my table had been watching him from the very first day. Claire, you are the best thing I ever did. The only thing I ever did that I am completely certain was right. You did not come from wealth or connections or an easy life. You came from 31 years of a man who loved you more than he loved his own comfort. Do not let anyone erase that. Do not let anyone erase you. You know what to do. You have always known. I love you. Dad. Claire cried as she read the letter. She folded the letter carefully. She didn't call Gerald back that day. She didn't call the following day. She allowed herself the time to mourn her father. 3 days after the burial, Claire went back to the apartment she shared with Marcus to pack her things. She moved calmly through the house. She packed her clothes and other things she bought with her own money. She left everything Marcus ever bought for her, everything they shared, and everything tied to their marriage. When she was done, she closed the suitcase, looked around the room one last time. Not with regret, not with anger, just recognition, like someone seeing a place clearly for the first time and realizing they no longer belonged there. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. While Claire was mourning and preparing herself for what was coming, Marcus had Maya settled into the house. Within a week of the burial, he had moved Maya's things in, her clothes in the wardrobe where Claire's used to hang, her products on the bathroom shelf, her shoes by the front door. He had even let Maya rearrange the sitting room because she said the old layout felt stiff and she wanted it to feel like theirs. He had let her because he thought it was theirs now. He thought he had closed one chapter cleanly and opened another without the kind of messy, prolonged legal battles that dragged on for years and cost everyone involved more than they had intended to spend. The divorce would be finalized in 6 to 8 weeks. The house will be his. Maya's baby was due in 10 weeks. By the time the child arrived, everything would be in order. Everything would be exactly as he had planned it. The papers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. He stood in the doorway and opened it. The first document was the property claim. Claire Sinclair, sole registered owner of the property at their address since the date of their wedding. Full legal history attached. Title deed attached. Original transfer documents attached. The second document was the criminal complaint. Forgery, fraud, attempted illegal property transfer. Marcus closed the front door slowly. He stood in the hallway of the house, unable to move. The house he had been so certain was already his was never his. He had been wrong. His lawyer arrived 2 hours later. He sat across from David in a leather chair that had never felt less comfortable. David laid everything out without softening any of it, because there was no version of this that could be softened. The property has been in Claire's name since your wedding day, David said. Edmund Sinclair transferred it to her as a wedding gift 11 years ago. It was never in his name at the time you attempted the refinancing. It was already hers, which means your submission to the bank was not just fraudulent, it was fraudulent against your wife's registered asset. Marcus said nothing. The forgery evidence is solid. They have the original documents. They have the bank submission. They have a handwriting analysis confirming the signature. And they have 14 months of investigator findings that your father-in-law commissioned before he died. The room was very quiet. Marcus thought about every Sunday lunch, every time he had sat across that table from Edmund Sinclair and looked at the old man with his second-hand car and his 3 rotating suits and his government office job, and felt nothing but a mild, comfortable contempt. Edmund had sat across from him at that same table and said almost nothing. And the entire time he had been watching, building, preparing. "Is there anything we can do about the property?" Marcus asked. "Any angle we haven't considered?" David looked at him steadily. "Nothing, Marcus." He paused. "And even if there were a challenge to pursue, you have a criminal complaint for forgery standing against you. You have fraud charges. You have a divorce counterfiling that includes evidence of emotional abuse, financial misconduct, and deliberate public humiliation." He closed the file. "Every avenue has been prepared against. Every possible exit has been considered and blocked." Marcus sat back in his chair, unable to speak. Maya shifted uncontrollably in her seat. She said nothing, but something twisted in her eyes. The first court appearance was 3 weeks later. Marcus arrived with David and found Claire already seated on the other side of the courtroom. He hadn't seen her since the burial. He had expected grief to still be visible in her eyes, expected the hollowness he had watched accumulate in her over 5 years to still be there, deepened by everything that had happened. She looked different. Not dramatically, not in a way he could point to and explain precisely, but she sat straighter. The tightness that had lived around her eyes for years was gone. She was dressed simply, and she was not looking at him. She was speaking quietly to her lawyer with the focused calm of someone who had prepared thoroughly and had nothing left to be afraid of. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the woman who had driven to the hospital 5 times a week for 11 days, while he read her messages and didn't respond. The woman who had come home to dirty dishes and folded laundry and said nothing. The woman who had stood at her father's grave and received divorce papers in front of everyone and signed them with a steady hand. He had looked at all of that and seen weakness. He had been looking at a woman who had already decided and was simply waiting for the right moment. He couldn't believe it. He genuinely could not reconcile the Claire he thought he had known with the woman sitting across that courtroom. He had tossed her out like she was nothing, like she was someone who could be removed and replaced and forgotten cleanly. The verdict came 6 weeks after the first appearance. He was found guilty on all counts: premeditated forgery, deliberate financial fraud, calculated abuse of a vulnerable party. The judge noted the particular cruelty of the timing, that Marcus had chosen his wife's father's burial to serve her divorce papers, that he had done so publicly and deliberately, that the video evidence confirmed this was not an impulsive act, but a planned humiliation designed to destroy Claire's dignity at her lowest point. The sentence was 18 months, suspended for 3 years on strict conditions. The criminal record was permanent, and the conditions were significant. 200 hours of community service, full financial restitution to the bank for all costs incurred during the fraudulent application process, a fine that took what remained of his personal savings, a formal restraining order preventing any contact with Claire Sinclair for 5 years, and a permanent criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. Marcus was ordered to vacate the property within 14 days. He stood outside the courtroom afterward with David beside him and Maya on the phone asking what had happened, and his mother already calling on the other line. And he looked at the street in front of him and understood with a completeness that arrived too late to change anything, that he had lost everything. Marcus didn't meet Maya at home when he returned. The house was quiet. Not the usual quiet. Something else. The kind of quiet that feels emptied. He stepped inside slowly. The first thing he noticed was the space. The sitting room looked different, lighter. The television was gone. The artwork on the wall, gone. The small glass table Maya had insisted on buying, gone. For a moment, he just stood there, trying to understand what he was looking at. Then he walked further in. The bedroom door was open. He pushed it slightly. The wardrobe doors were wide open, half of it empty. Drawers pulled out, jewelry box missing, his expensive wristwatches gone, suitcases gone. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not panic, not yet. Just a slow, creeping awareness that something had moved beyond his control. He reached for his phone, called Maya, switched off. He called again. Same result. That was when he saw it, on the table. A single sheet of paper, folded neatly, and beside it, another paper, a medical report. Marcus walked toward it slowly, each step heavier than the last. He picked up the paper first, recognized the handwriting immediately. Maya's. He unfolded it, read. Once, then again. Marcus, you always thought you were the smartest person in the room. You weren't. I knew about Claire long before you decided to introduce me into your house. I knew what you were trying to do. I just didn't think you would be stupid enough to destroy everything this quickly. There's no baby for you to raise. There never was. Don't bother looking for me. The report on the table will explain why. The money is gone. All of it. Maya. Marcus lowered the note slowly. His fingers tightened around the paper. Then he picked up the report, unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page, scanning, stopping, returning to one line, then reading it again and again. The words didn't change. They stayed exactly where they were. Clear, clinical, final. Conclusion. Patient is infertile. Biological paternity is not possible. He sat down without realizing when his legs gave way. The paper still in his hand. The room suddenly too quiet, too still. Everything he had built his certainty on shifted, cracked, collapsed inward. The child he had used to replace his wife was never his. The proof he had held over Claire meant nothing. Marcus let out a short breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything. Just air leaving his body as the last piece of control slipped through his fingers. His boss called the next day. Marcus had been on unpaid leave during the trial at the company's request. He had told himself it was temporary, that he would return once things were resolved, that the company would see a suspended sentence as different from an actual conviction and would find a way to retain him quietly. He was wrong. The HR director was professionally brief. Given the nature of the conviction and the reputational implications for the company, we are terminating your contract with immediate effect. You will receive the minimum statutory notice pay. Your access to company systems has already been revoked. Please arrange to collect your personal items from reception. The call lasted 4 minutes. Marcus put the phone down and sat in his old bedroom at Vivian's house and stared at the wall. The title was gone. The salary was gone. The company car would be collected at the end of the week. The corporate card had already stopped working. He had nothing to put on a job application except a criminal record for forgery and fraud, and no reputable company in their industry would touch him. 14 days later, Marcus Reed packed what he had left. He moved back to his mother's house. Marcus's phone beeped with notifications he wasn't opening. The video from the burial had been circulating for weeks. Comments he had stopped reading. People who knew him, people who worked with him, people who had shaken his hand at events and called him by his first name. All of them had seen it. All of them had watched him walk through a cemetery with his pregnant girlfriend and hand his grieving wife divorce papers at her father's graveside and tell her to bury her concerns along with her father. He had planned that moment to finish her. Instead, it had finished him. Claire did not watch him leave the house. She didn't need to. She had already moved forward, already begun the work of learning what Edmund had built and understanding how to manage it and carry it forward in the way he would have wanted. She kept the house, not because she needed it, but because it was her own. Edmund had bought it, and walking away from something Edmund had given her was something she was no longer willing to do. Claire woke up on a Saturday morning 18 months after her father's burial to a silence that belonged entirely to her. She made tea, sat at Edmund's kitchen table, put the photograph in front of her the way she did every morning now. Edmund in his gray suit at her graduation. She had kept the house. In the months after the verdict, she had done what Edmund had spent 31 years preparing her to do. She had sat with Gerald. She had studied every asset, every investment, every property in Edmund's portfolio with the same focused precision she had applied to her finance career over the years. She hadn't handed it to the manager and walked away. She had learned it. All of it. Line by line, property by property. The way Edmund had built it. Quietly, carefully, without rushing. Then she launched her own firm, Sinclair Capital. Small at first, focused, built on Edmund's foundation and years of her own expertise. Within a year, her reputation in the industry had grown in a way that made the people around her nervous all over again. Not because she was loud about it, because she was good, sharp, focused, impossible to ignore. Marcus had spent years telling her that her career was the problem. Her career had been the answer the entire time. She registered the Edmund Sinclair Foundation 12 months after the burial, a combined foundation doing two things simultaneously: supporting single parents raising children alone, the way Edmund had raised her, and funding university scholarships for children from low-income single-parent homes so that no child missed their opportunity because of money. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a 19-year-old girl being raised by her father alone. Claire personally signed the award letter. Marcus had a criminal record, no company, no house, no family. Claire had everything. Not because she had fought loudly or broken down or reacted the way he had planned at that graveside, but because she had done exactly what Edmund had taught her from the time she was 5 years old, standing at her mother's grave holding his hand. She had been still. She had been patient. She had been certain. And she had waited. Never measure a person by what they show you. Edmund Sinclair wore 3 suits for 31 years and built $700 million in silence. Claire Sinclair signed divorce papers at her father's grave without shedding a tear and walked away with everything. The quietest people in the room are often the most prepared. Never mistake stillness for weakness. Never mistake silence for surrender. And never, ever underestimate a woman who has a strong support like Edmund Sinclair. And always remember that those who walk away from you are never worth you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to like this post, comment what you've learned below, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.